This is Dan McCarthy, and you're listening to the Check-In Podcast. So I think we are inevitably going to get this barrage of pop culture coming at us over the next few years that centers on stories told in 2020 and 2021 during the COVID pandemic. I think the phrase is never let a good crisis go to waste, and Hollywood is certainly familiar with not letting a good crisis go to waste. I think we'll probably get some medical dramas about the virus's ascent and its attack on the world. I'm sure we'll get some family-centered movies about, families adopting to see each other either never or seeing each other all the time. And we'll probably get a couple of romantic comedies, maybe something about trying to date during a pandemic or something about trying to maintain a relationship during the crisis. But one of the first pieces of pop culture about the pandemic that I've consumed, and the first that actually stuck with me, was this special on Netflix called Inside. Inside is the creation of a stand-up comedian called Bo Burnham, a millennial who was one of those first people to really get famous on the internet in the early 2000s, doing these parody songs that just took off. I'm not really a huge stand-up comedy fan, and watching the special, it's fairly obvious it's not really a stand-up comedy special. The way I would describe it is a meditation on life during COVID and a meditation on loneliness. Through these parody songs and these monologues, which were all written and directed by him, by himself, at his house in LA, he kind of makes you aware of the incredible amount of loneliness and the massive consolidation of life that happened over the past year. There's a lot of lightness to it, but it's also an hour of a heavy meditation about living your life, not only within four walls, but also living your life on the internet, which is something that so many people have been forced to do and so many people have made habits of over the past year because of COVID. It concentrates on living your life stuck in one place, whether that's by your choice or by an act of God. I thoroughly enjoyed the hour or so, but I can definitely say that it horrified me. The tension and this feeling that stuck with me after watching it made me want to live my life with more focus on what's away from the computer or away from the television or away from the iPhone screen. And I promised myself that I was going to make an effort to do just that, to try to put down my phone more and more, and to be a bit okay with being bored every now and then, and not to be worried when the internet goes out, or not to be worried when I misplace my phone somewhere in my apartment. It made me want to take some giant leaps into real life and to be a bit more ambitious. And that's one of the main focuses of my discussion today. It's being comfortable with taking leaps of faith, and whether that's a step out of your house or a giant leap out of your comfort zone. So many people in travel, particularly the ones who run their own agency or the ones who run their own businesses, they have taken those leaps of faith in their own lives. And while some have succeeded and a lot more have failed, it's just something that makes the industry so unique, this entrepreneurial spirit that drives this innovation and drives the industry forward each and every day. My guest today for this episode, Vanessa McGovern, attributes a lot of her success to being comfortable taking leaps of faith. I know so many of you know Vanessa, either from her work at Gifted Travel Network or at Cruise Planners, or with ASTA, which we actually talk about on this episode with ASTA's Legislative Day. But did you know that her first job in travel was as a youth counselor on a Celebrity Cruises ship? Because I didn't, and it's something we do get into. It's a little longer of a conversation than some of the previous episodes, but one that I truly enjoyed, and one that I hope you will enjoy too. A couple of housekeeping before I get to the conversation. If you're listening to this on YouTube, we'd love for you to subscribe and to like the video. If you're on another platform, we'd love and appreciate a short review or rating. All that helps us keep growing this community, and that's something that I hope to do, to keep connecting with you all. So, without further ado, let's check in with Vanessa. Hi.
Hey, Dan.
Hi, Vanessa. How are you?
I'm good.
Everyone talks about being zoomed out now, and I think that's a real thing, but
It is.
I mean, it does feel a better connection to someone when you're talking to them when you can see their face.
Definitely. I don't know, was I having this conversation with somebody? I think it was with Virtuoso earlier this week. They were asking our feedback on why, like, what was stopping advisors from potentially signing up for in-person virtual so travel week. And a lot of the feedback generally was that everybody's really busy and they obviously don't want to, after a year of not having income, they're worried to be away for a week. And that's one of the main reasons. And I agree with that. That's definitely the main reason. And my contribution to that conversation was, and on top of that, for GTN members, they've been talking to supplier partners probably a lot more often this year than they did before because of Zoom.
Yeah, it's like it felt like it was just this outlet that it made it incredibly easy to be proactive with people and to be proactive with building those relationships, which is obviously a good thing.
That's what this industry is all about. And for the frontline advisor, I can't speak to the other hosts, but for the GTN advisor, the connection remained, it deepened, it grew stronger, and there was actually a lot more visibility.
Yeah, it didn't. It made it so easy. I mean, I remember in the past couple years having appointments being pushed out. Like, oh, we're going to see you at this conference. We're going to see you at that conference. Let's just wait for that. But now it's just so easy just to send a link and jump on a call.
I know. I think I did a phone call with somebody the other day, or we were deciding, and I was like, should I do old-fashioned phone call, or are we doing Zoom?
Yeah,
because
exactly.
I knew them and it was okay to just jump on a call, but the default is Zoom.
Yeah, good for Zoom, I guess. I guess that good for Zoom. It's become a verb, which I know is a big thing for a brand.
Yes. And so I saw you in person.
Yeah.
That was a whirlwind.
That was my first business trip since January, maybe 2020 or February 2020. That was the first time. Yeah, I took Amtrak down from New York, and it was I really had a good time, even though I was in and out, so I was just there for a day. But like just
for the press conference.
Exactly. And just being able to put on a suit and travel was just like, it was so refreshing. It was like so incredibly refreshing. And the press conference was great too.
I think they pulled that together beautifully.
Yeah, and it was a special venue too, the press club. It seemed very I felt very lucky to be there.
Me too. They extended the invite to a lot of people, and it was just who could make it kind of thing. I was surprised there weren't more people. Like, I'm like, why wouldn't you go? Like, this is so cool. I'm like, to be there in person. If we're already in DC, I'm like, that was like a no-brainer. Obviously, we're going to go in person. You could feel I want to say, I guess, really the emotion of it all. Like, I felt Jennifer Wilson Buttigieg during that press conference. I was getting choked up for her when she was talking about her personal story. Like, the emotions, you could really feel them through all four speakers.
Yeah, and I want to ask you about that during this interview, but I do want to get a bit of your background for the listeners too, because I know a lot of people are interested, and I know you've been sort of a force around the travel industry for a while now. But I was looking through your LinkedIn, and I saw you had like a different start than a lot of people, and I was hoping you could tell me a little bit about how you got your start. I know you're originally from Canada, right?
I am. I only recently became a U.S. citizen in the pandemic on June 30th.
Yeah.
So it'll be coming up on a year now.
That's a pretty big life accomplishment, I guess you can call it.
It was, absolutely. I feel really proud. It was unfortunate that I chose to apply for citizenship and then in the pandemic, because it was a slightly anticlimactic, because I had to go and do the whole thing on my own. But nevertheless, it was still special and meaningful. Of course, I'm not like renouncing my Canadian citizenship or anything. I still will continue to hold my Canadian passport. But I mean, I live here. I built my life here. My husband's American. My kids are American. I am American.
Yeah, I have dual citizenship too. So, but I'm not, like, I don't think there was ever a question of renouncing one or the other. And so
you're dual with what? With where?
I'm so my parents are are from Ireland. So me and my sisters we're first generation. Yeah. At one point, I don't think I was told why we pursued Irish citizenship, but at one point when I was a child, my parents pursued it for all of us, and we were lucky enough, to.
That's helpful.
Yeah, it is. It's very helpful being able to sort of bypass those customs when you're flying into Heathrow or you're flying into Dublin Airport or stuff like that.
You can go work in the EU.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah, I studied over there for a while, and I got to pay EU tuition, which was significantly cheaper then.
Where did you study?
I was in London at University of Goldsmiths.
So I did a year abroad in London as well, but let me rephrase that. I did a year abroad in England. I spent all my weekends in London, but I lived in East Sussex. My Canadian university had a campus there. So I paid Canadian tuition, which was a beautiful thing. And I spent a year there as well. So I loved my time in England.
England seems like a great introduction for international living for a lot of people. Because
Yes.
we just spoke about Jennifer, and Jennifer mentioned that she spent some time over there
Right.
too. I forget who else I was speaking to. Maybe Betsy, who O'Rourke, and she mentioned it as well. It does seem like a great country, and London in particular, a great city to sort of get that introduction to life outside of
Yes.
North America.
Agreed.
You're from the Greater Toronto area, is that
I
right?
am.
Okay.
Yes. So I grew up just outside of Toronto in a little suburb called Whitby. And my parents still live in the same house that I grew up in. And my kids still swim in the same pool that I swim in whenever we go in the summers. Obviously, I wasn't able to go in 2020 and now again in 2021, but generally in non-pandemic years, I go with the kids for the whole summer. So I feel like I have the best of both worlds because I still enjoy Canada a lot throughout the year, and I live here. So yeah, that's where I grew up. I went to school in Kingston, Ontario. I did a 4-year, my undergrad, my 4-year undergrad there. And then while I was completing my undergrad, I had a friend that had a friend that had worked on a cruise ship in the summers. And I was like, that's interesting. And my family had never cruised. I'd never been on a cruise. I didn't really understand it, but it just sounded really interesting. And I had just come back from my year abroad and I was craving like just more travel and more international. And I didn't really know what that meant. But then when somebody told me about working on board a cruise ship, it piqued my interest. And so it turned out that the woman that recruited for cruise line positions, for onboard cruise line positions, she lived literally within walking distance of my parents' house. The woman that recruited for all over Canada. It was crazy, the coincidence. So I reached out to her going into my 4th year, and I had just run a summer camp as my summer job for international students. So I ran this camp. It was a private school that converted into a summer camp for students from like Mexico and Middle East and Europe. And kids would come, and I would run this camp for 3 weeks on, and then another batch of kids for another 3 weeks. So I had experience with children, is the point. And so one of the positions with youth was youth staff. So I was like, I ran a camp. I can work with the kids on the cruise lines. That's something I can do. So they hired me. Celebrity Cruise Lines hired me as a seasonal youth staff on the Horizon. And I stepped foot on there for their Christmas, New Year's cruise. And because that's when the peak of children come on. And so they tend to hire, cruise lines will hire seasonal youth staff to help with that influx of families traveling. So that was my first entree into the industry.
Wow, I had no idea. Yeah. That is a really cool story. What was it? So you went from, I guess, living in Canada, but then I have always wanted to ask cruise staff this, and I think I've had in the past, but like, what is it like to live and work on a cruise ship? How long were you there for?
I worked consecutively on board for 2.5 years. I mean,
Oh,
I
wow.
had maybe like a year or two, like a week or two off for vacation, or sometimes I would have a month off and I would go home and then I would get another contract. I did that for 2.5 years, but then for another 7 years after that, I worked for the onboard company, for the onboard revenue company. I worked for the art auction company, and I would travel around. So I didn't work on the ships, but I managed the programs on the ships. And so I
Okay.
would go, sometimes I would have to fill in, and an auctioneer was leaving, but the new auctioneer couldn't come in time. So I'd have to like quickly get on a plane and like fill in for like 2 weeks somewhere with no notice. This would happen often. Or I would go and sail with the auctioneer and help them and train them. So I still very much was a part of that crew experience over the next other 7 years. But for the first 2, I was like assigned a room. I was living on board. I had a crew number. I had life drill duties. Yeah, I lived on board.
So how was that like? It
I
just
know it's a
seems like
loaded question. It's like, where do you even go with that, right?
I
So
know, but it seems like such a commitment to make that. I've been on cruise ships. I've been on sort of a bunch of inaugurals over the past since I've been with
mhm.
TMR. So I understand the experience, but I do not understand the experience of crew members.
Yeah.
What was the best thing about maybe we should start there. What was the best thing about being able to work on a cruise ship?
Well, for me, the time of my life, the phase of the life that I was in, I highly recommend, if you're going to work on cruise ships, to do it in your early 20s when you
Okay.
don't have you don't have a mortgage, you don't have a car, you don't have financial commitments, and you can just, literally travel all over the world. And you work really hard as a crew member, and you never have a day off. You have hours, chunks of time sometimes within the day off, like segments of the day. But then when you do have that time off as a crew member and you've just been working like really hard and crazy hours, all of a sudden you're in Athens, or you're in Buenos Aires, or you're in Cayman, or you're in Juneau, or you're just in this amazing place that you would never have been able to go to, or I thought I would never have been able to go to when I was at that stage in my life. And it was amazing. And so the slogan of the so cliche, but it's very true, of the work hard, play hard. Yeah. That's the crew member.
What is the community like with crew members on board? Is it a big sort of, does it feel like a college dorm, or does it feel like strictly something completely different?
I think there's definitely elements of college dorm life for sure. I wouldn't say that that's the overall vibe. I think every cruise line's culture is different. Every cruise line, even within the ships, the culture can vary. But I think fundamentally it's a transient culture because people are constantly signing on and off for different positions and from different places of the world and at different points in their contract. So there's this unspoken camaraderie because you build rapport. Like there's like this running, I don't know if you want to call it a joke, but it's like this running thing, I guess, that you just know that if you're in a relationship on a cruise ship and it's like a week, it's basically like 6 months on land.
Okay.
Everything is accelerated, amplified when you're a crew member because things just happen really quickly. And because it's very transient, you just learn to build rapport and be more vulnerable and just actually create deep relationships with people in very short amounts of time. And I'm actually, some of the friendships and the relationships that I built while working on board, I still have. In fact, this summer, I'm staying with friends that also met on board cruise ships that I worked with at my Park West days, still when I was on board. They live out in Colorado, and I'm going to be staying, my kids and I, and my husband and I and kids are going to go out there for the summer for 2 weeks in July. And that's from my cruise ship days. I'm still in touch with a lot of people from that stage of my life.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine, because you read sort of forums and stuff pop up on the internet about living on a cruise ship, because it does seem like
it's hard.
Yeah, but it does seem like an attractive thing for someone who's maybe
for the right person.
Exactly, yeah.
You have to have the right mindset. If you're very particular and you need certain foods and you need your room a certain way. I mean, my rooms were small. Yeah. I mean, I didn't have windows. It was very difficult and sometimes noisy. But again, at that stage in my life, having just been in a college dorm where I lived with like 5 other girls in a very small townhouse off campus, it wasn't so uncommon for me. It was an easy transition. I think it's harder for people who have their lives already in a rhythm on land to then transition onto cruise ships is not as easy, but it's so much fun. And crew life can be very rewarding and a lot of fun. And, like I said, the cruise lines have dedicated team members and employees that their whole job is and their teams are to take care of the crew members and like activities and mental health. And I can't speak for what it's like now, but probably the hardest part about being a crew member at the time, when I didn't even realize it was that hard, but I think this is what would be the hardest part right now, is the internet and the Wi-Fi and being able to stay connected. I remember back when I was a crew member, I would have to sign up for a time on a computer that was like for everybody. And I would show up at like 10:15 on Friday and log in and check my email and send a message to my parents to let them know that I was not scrubbing the decks and that I was okay.
Yeah. I remember my parents took us on a Royal Caribbean sailing when we were younger, and even the internet experience for passengers was significantly different. I remember having to go to the internet cafe, and I think you paid per minute, maybe you paid like 99 cents a minute. Yeah.
With the scratch cards.
Yeah. Oh my
Yeah,
God.
we had that too as crew members. So it was an amazing experience. And oftentimes and so I started as a youth counselor, and I very quickly realized that that was not going to be my path
Okay.
permanently working on board. And I started to, I remember interviewing and taking different people out for coffee on the ship on their breaks to talk to different positions on board so that I could get an understanding of where I thought I would fit. And so I ended up landing on the art auctioneering position. So I loved that. That was a really good role for me because I love public speaking. I had my degree in history. And so it was like a really good, and I loved art history. And so it was a good position for me. And
Yeah.
so I like to say that between my skills that I honed as an art auctioneer, plus just the skills that you grow as a crew member, I feel like that literally prepared me for anything. I, I am prepared for anything in life after those being in that situation.
So I want to ask you about how you continued your career, but I do want to just jump in because we were talking about cruise lines. I'm just curious because you do have this deep connection with that industry now, just
I
because you,
do.
you were physically a part of it. I mean, how was it seeing all the news stories last year?
Ugh.
All that, especially in the beginning of COVID. How, I mean, how did that affect you?
It was hard.
Yeah.
It affected me deeply. I would be following the YouTube videos that I would see that I'm in a lot of crew member Facebook groups still to stay connected and just to see, just to hear what's going on. And so I would see videos posted of that crew members were making, like montages with emotional songs, and then like dances, and the crew members doing dances to it. And it was just them on the ships. And I got very emotional many times watching those videos. To at one point, my husband recognized the background music and he could see my tears, and he's like, "Are you watching that again?" And I'm like,
Oh
"You
my
don't
God.
understand. These people are on a ship and they can't get to their families." And I I was very, like, I'm emotional now even thinking about it. Like, I cannot even imagine the anxiety and just confusion of not knowing what to feel. Because I can imagine at the beginning it was a whirlwind and nobody had the right information. I can't imagine the information that got filtered down to just the general crew. Like, they didn't know what was happening, and we didn't even know what was happening, never mind somebody who's on a cruise ship. And what were they told, and when did they think they could leave the ship, and were they stuck in their cabins with no windows? I'm like, I was and then how are they getting their supplies? Like, is anybody letting them dock? Like, are they getting their food? Like, oof, it was emotional to watch those videos.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, all the consumer stories were when part of me thinks it was appropriate, but they were all about the passengers that were stuck on the ship too.
Mhm.
But I mean, a lot of people had those didn't have the thought in their head that that includes just as many crew members on board
People
too.
live on the ships.
Exactly.
People have been there's been crew members still on the ships this entire time. There's been some crew members that weren't even allowed to be repatriated back to their countries during COVID.
Yeah,
Those
and
stories haven't come out. A
I
lot of those
know.
stories haven't come out.
I mean, it does seem like there is a focus on the crew now, though, and I think cruise lines are
Yeah,
even ready now, more ready now than ever to publicize their focus on the crew members. Even before, I remember being
I
on a couple of the
agree.
new celebrity ships before COVID, and they weren't bragging, but they were showcasing
They were.
we've improved accommodations for our crew members. You know,
They were.
yeah. So
I loved Lisa Lutoff Perel from Celebrity, her female initiatives for female crew members. And in fact, in March for the International Women's Day and all females, female officers, and I follow a lot of that on LinkedIn, and it's very inspiring to see that, because that was not the case when I was a crew member, for sure. It was a very, very male dominated space in terms of officers on board. So that feels really good to see that shift. And I see that Royal Caribbean is doing that a lot too. They're highlighting female officers. And I really like that. And, recently I've been seeing Michael Bailey of Royal Caribbean on his fan page. Are you following his fan page? Because he posts daily images of the crew member of the different ships getting their vaccines and giving updates on the stats. And then he'll post an image of meet, so and so who works in the galley, and meet so and so who's a room attendant, and they've been working for Royal Caribbean for 20 years. And my heart just explodes when I hear those stories.
yeah,
I took my family on a Royal Caribbean cruise in 2019 for their spring break, for the kids' spring break, and I teach them, my kids from, as soon as we walk on board, they had to be nice to every single crew member, especially our room attendants, especially our dining room attendants. And because I know that side of the space in the crew and in the cruise industry, it's a
Yeah.
very special community being a crew member.
Yeah, and I love hearing these stories because there's such a force of people behind every interaction you have in
It's
travel.
true.
In my last episode, Brian King from Marriott mentioned how he treats staff members when he goes to Marriott's hotels and things like that. And
Mm.
I really I love hearing that kind of stuff too, because I think it's going to be important more now than ever just to recognize that the names and faces behind like these giant numbers
Yes.
of people employed in the travel industry.
I agree. I love hearing the stories of the crew.
Yeah.
And I still, to this day, have habits, customer service type habits that are ingrained in me from working on board. Even just on Royal Caribbean, I remember when I was there, during the time that I was there as a crew member, there was a huge initiative to always say a pleasure. Like it was never like when somebody said thank you, you never said you're welcome. It was like my pleasure. It's my
Okay.
pleasure. And so I was just, and even now to this day, I always say that after everything. And I always think about that because it's from my Royal Caribbean training. And then even when I would get off the ship, when I was working on board and I'd be just taking a vacation for 3 weeks, whatever, I'd go home to Canada, I'd be in the grocery store and I'd be opening doors for people. And I was like, I'm on vacation. I'm like, I'm not on a ship, because it's ingrained in you to be
Yeah.
at your service. Like
Yeah.
that's the mindset of a crew member, is you're just always at somebody's service. And it doesn't matter what the name badge says. It doesn't matter that my name badge said art auctioneer. If somebody came up to me and they saw me with a name badge and they had an issue where they needed help, you'd stop what you're doing and you figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. And so how many years did you spent time in the youth club, then you spent time as the art auctioneer, and then I mean, what was your transition to get into the trade side of travel?
Yeah, that's a really good
Yeah.
question. So I was working for Park West, and that was the onboard revenue side of the business. And in 2008, as you can appreciate with the recession, the onboard, I mean, the cruise industry obviously suffered. A lot of industries did in that year. And if people were able to get onboard cruise ships, it was very difficult. They didn't have a lot of spend while they were on board. So then the onboard revenue side really suffered. And so a lot of different departments, not just the art department, took a big hit. And so I was starting, and also at that phase in my life in 2008, by then I had just gotten married. It was like just a year or two after I had gotten married. And so my husband and I were starting to think about, starting a family. And I was a real road warrior, big time. And I knew that I wasn't going to be able to continue that level of lifestyle and start a family. And so all of those factors, like, I don't know how the company will transition out of this
Yep.
recession, plus I can't continue this road warrior lifestyle. It started making me wonder, like, what's out there for me. And I only knew the onboard side of the business. I didn't know anything else. And then one day, I'll never forget, and actually it's my friend that I'm visiting in Colorado this summer. So that's a good little transition there, good little coincidence. He came into my office. I remember, because we worked together at the time in the Miami Lakes office, because that's where the majority of the art collections are housed. Even though the gallery is based in Detroit, they have a huge warehouse in Miami Lakes to basically be the fulfillment center for the cruise ships. So he came into my office, he closed the door, like top secret, like don't tell anybody I'm here. And he had Entrepreneur magazine. And then he opened it up and he put down a full page ad for cruise planners for a franchise. And he pointed at it and he was like, my wife and I are going to buy this. And I'm like, buy what? He's like, a cruise planning franchise. And I'm like, what's that? And he's like, we can sell cruises. Like, that's a thing. And I'm like, really? I'm like, we can sell cruises. I'm like, I know every cruise line. I know every ship. I know every category. I've been to every itinerary. I'm like, we can make money doing that? I'm like, that's a thing? That's how blind I was to that side of the industry. No idea. So I started by purchasing a cruise planner franchise. And I remember convincing my husband, using our tax return money that year. I was like, I'm buying a I have no idea how this is going to work, but I know that I know cruises, and we need to come up with a plan for how I get out of the onboard side and start getting into other segments of the industry, because there's only so many companies in the onboard segment, and I wanted to expand my, portfolio of what I knew of the industry. So that's how I started. And so shortly after I purchased a franchise, I went to the new franchise training class.
Okay.
And I will tell you that there are moments in your life, in my life, and maybe you have them too, Dan, like where you just know that you are exactly where you're meant to be. And it's just, I still to this day can capture that emotion of like sitting in the front row of that training class and listening to the different people that came, the partners, the team, and the employees, and just feeling like I was going to spontaneously combust with happiness. Like I was like, this is the best thing I have ever heard in my life. And I had that same emotion the first day I stepped on board the Celebrity Horizon. And all my fellow youth counselor people were annoyed at me and making fun of me because I couldn't stop walking up to other crew members and saying, "Hi, I'm Vanessa. I'm the new youth staff. Hi, I'm Vanessa. I'm from Canada. I'm the new youth staff." I was just so dang excited for like the first 24 hours. I just I wanted to know everybody, and I wanted to know everything. And I just knew in that moment that I made the right decision and I was meant to work on board ships. I was so happy to be there. And then I had that same feeling when I was sitting in that franchise class. Like it was just this feeling of like, I am meant to do this. I am meant to be on this side of the industry now. I'm meant to do something related to travel agents and travel agencies and learn about these partners. And it was an exciting week for me. And it was the inspiration and the catalyst I needed to fully leave Park West, which was a big security blanket for me at the time. As you can appreciate, I was working there for a really long time. And I, put in my notice and went knee deep into entrepreneurship. Then that didn't last too long because then Cruise Planners had an opening for a training manager, and they interviewed me and I accepted. And so then I took that position, and I really loved everything about what I did in that position. And I learned so much of that, of not just the travel agent side of the business, but then the running of sort of franchise. And then now in my host model, it's a similar business model. So I got a huge, I guess, crash course into that side of the industry. So that's how it all happened. And then everything just kind of developed from there.
The one thing I want to ask, and this is, I've been curious about this from hearing people's career stories, and even like when I'm watching Shark Tank, I think about this all the time. Is the leap from going from a fairly stable job with healthcare and benefits into doing something as an entrepreneur. I mean, how much guts does that take? And I mean,
A lot.
yeah, what's the feeling like? I mean, does it feel like you're like the rug's pulled out from under you at a certain point? Does it feel like, do you have second thoughts along the way?
It didn't feel like the rug. So it didn't feel like the rug was pulled out from underneath me, but because I chose, I leapt into it. I didn't experience that emotion, but having worked with travel advisors and coaching them in this kind of capacity now over the last almost decade, I know that that is the case for a lot of people that have actually started travel businesses, because they've been in situations where they were forced, because of layoffs or just changes or just, career moments. And then they decided to just go for it. So I wouldn't say that so you have to be, and this is, I always have this conversation with my mom. I get this mainly from my dad. So my dad ran his main business when I was growing up. He was a pizza store owner. He owned the local pizzeria in our little small town. Okay. And so it was Pedro's Pizza, and he owned his own business. And I worked, when I was my son's age at 10, I started working the cashier and serving the slices to the high school students and folding boxes and helping my dad. And so I had a very good entry point into entrepreneurship because I saw my dad doing it. But there's great risk and there's great reward, and there's lots of twists and turns on the road, and you have to be okay with that. And my dad taught me to be more risk friendly. I'm not scared of risk because I saw my dad take a lot of them. My mom, on the other hand, worked for General Motors for 35 years. And she is just like, find a company, stay with them for your entire career, right? That's her generation. We know that generation. And so she hated, and she was so supportive. I have a very good relationship with my mom, closest person in my life, talk to her every day, but she hated a lot of my decisions because it wasn't the safe path. So I know I'm kind of going around your answer, but to answer that question directly, it's you have to be okay with risk. You have to be okay with uncertainty. That's sort of the vibe of entrepreneurship. You have to embrace the unknown. You have to be okay with that. You have to trust that everything is going to work out. You have to be always looking for the silver lining, and you just have to be really curious as to how things are going to unfold and just be okay with things that are unexpected. And so the first time I made that decision to start the franchise, but then I shortly thereafter got a job offer, and then I was back to not entrepreneurship, right? But then fast forward to, so that lasted until I ended up resigning from special needs group. I had just launched their certification program. I was part of the team that launched that program. And my son was about to turn 1, and I was leaving him at a very ridiculous time of the morning with a nanny, with a babysitter. And then I was driving very far to go there. And this entire drive, I was feeling the mom guilt and all of those emotions. And he was about to turn 1. And I just kept having that same feeling that I was having before when I started this franchise of entrepreneurship. And I guess something definitely shifts when you have children. And I just had this overwhelming feeling of like, I just need to lean into the unknown and trust that the next opportunity or whatever I meant to do is going to just happen. I know that sounds crazy, but I had a very good relationship. I still have a very good relationship with Andy at Special Needs Group, who's very good to me. And I love his company. I love his mission. And I remember sitting in his office right before the holidays of 2011, going into 2012, and just basically telling him that I really just wanted to take some time, and to figure out what I really wanted. This commute was not what I wanted. I didn't want that for my son. I just wanted a little bit more flexibility. And I wasn't sure what that meant, but I was going to just figure it out. And he was so supportive. He gave me the rest of the year off. And when I started January of 2012, I know what the heck I was going to do. but I will tell you that I still remember every single day that I woke up in January, I was exploding with happiness. I just knew that even though I didn't know what was next, I was doing what I was supposed to do. And that I just had to trust.
Yeah, I think the words I should have used was like the leap of faith, taking that leap of faith as opposed to having the rug pulled out, because it is a giant leap. Yeah.
Huge.
Oh
Huge.
my God.
And when I moved to North Carolina, because we started GTN, Meredith Hill and Jennifer Cochran, who are fellow co-founders of GTN, they lived here. And so I would fly here from Fort Lauderdale to meet with them. And then eventually we were like, okay, let's do this. So my husband was so supportive. He's always so supportive. And he was like, all right. And he's an IT guy, so he can find work anywhere. So we made the leap, huge, massive leap, to start a host agency in the middle of Mooresville, North Carolina. I mean, for a travel industry person, they're like, where's that? Charlotte? Not exactly. And even Charlotte's not exactly the hub of the travel industry. But we did it, and we moved up here. And I share this with you because we literally moved up here on blind faith. And the rental market at the time when we moved up here was super competitive, as it has now full circle become again. And I found a house, and I needed to make sure we could secure it. And I'm like, Meredith, go see the house for me. Because obviously I couldn't see it. I was in Florida. So she went, she was like, yeah, it's good. Put the deposit. Yeah. So I did. And so blindly, based on her reassuring me that it was going to be fine. And it was. And the road that the house was off of was Faith. So when we moved up here and we turned on the main road to get to our new little subdivision, I was driving on Faith Road. I'm like, okay, universe, I am doing what I'm supposed to do. Thank you for that reassurance.
Oh man. Yeah, I hear stories here in New York. Like, I'm a part of the New York City Reddit pages and stuff like that. And there's always questions about, hey, I'm moving across the country to live in New York City. I can't go look at my apartment. And everyone always yells at them and like you can't rent sight unseen. It's too big of a risk. But yeah, again, like it just seems like you're so incredibly comfortable with risk, which is something that seems like
so. Which is like I laugh because my mom would cringe if she heard that. That's been like the hard spot for her, watching me, soar, is all the risks that I've taken. But it's always, I mean, hey, sometimes things don't work out, and I think that that's just part of the journey, and you just excrete the bad and extract the good, and you move on.
I mean, how do you deal when things don't work out though? That's what I wanted to ask, because you are an incredibly positive person, but I things sometimes don't work out, and I'm curious how you've dealt with
Mhm.
when those times when things don't work out. How do you process it? And I mean, do you have outlets? Do you use
Mhm.
relationships? I mean, what's your sort of process like?
So the key is to process it.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've learned is, I haven't always processed things that disappointed me and didn't sit well with me. I've learned that when you don't deal with it, it will show up physically, it'll manifest in physicalness. And I actually had some pretty, almost very serious, but I caught it before it developed into what could have been cancer, a couple of years ago. And it gave me a little bit of a wake up call, and I started having to change some of my habits, my road warrior habits. And but then it wasn't just about processing, like, why was this physical ailment showing up for me. I'm, like I said before, I think part of why I am positive and move things forward the way that I do is that I'm just like a naturally curious person. So I start asking questions like, well, why is this showing up for me? Like, what is really going on? Like, what is this a reflection of? Like, what am I not dealing with that my body is, giving me this issue? And so I'm a big believer in that. So I think the key to what you just said is, how do you process it? And the answer is, you process it. You have to process it. You have to actually feel whatever it is you want to feel. But the key is to not, and I think this is where my mental muscle is more developed than I think in other people that I've come into contact with. I don't sit in it. I don't dwell on it. I don't regurgitate it. I don't want to call 5 different people and talk about it for days on end. I don't want to repeat it. Like, I will process it, and I will own it, and I will like move through the emotion of it, and I will, give myself permission to feel whatever emotion I want to feel around it, and I won't feel guilty about it, but I don't stay in it.
Okay.
And I tell my kids that. When you said that, I hear my son chastising me, because I always say, focus on the good, focus on the good. Tell me, okay, fine. You want to complain about what just happened at your day at school today? Fine, give it to me. But if you're going to complain about one thing, you got to give me 5 things that were good. You got to, I'm going to force you to now count your blessings for at least 5 different things. And then of course, he's 10. And so he goes on his things. I'm like, well, the bus driver got you to school safely, right? Yes, that was good. Okay, let's talk about that. So you just got to focus. It's what you focus on expands. If you're going to focus on the things that are going wrong and the things that disappointed you, then you're just going to keep getting more of that.
Yeah.
And it's not that it's not true, and it's not that it didn't happen. I don't want to ignore it. I don't choose to focus on it.
Yeah, I mean, I can like when you tell that story, I can almost feel my mother doing the same thing. But like, I can think about my childhood, and I think about me being upset, and her being like, why are you upset? Like, that was always her answer, was just, why are you upset? Like, this isn't a big deal. Of course, she had a more perspective than I had as a child, obviously. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's good to remember that stuff too, I think. And
Focus on the good. My son likes to say to me, well, fine, I'll focus on the medium. I'm like, no, there's no medium. It's the good. And then he does that to joke with me. But yeah, it's focus on the good. So
so I,
process your emotions. That's really key to
so
moving through it.
so I don't want to take up your whole hour here, but I have a few more
Okay.
questions. One that I've been meaning to ask every guest, but I haven't. But I do want to ask you, because you talk about being comfortable with risk, is that W- Are you when you travel? Are you the type of person to get to the airport really early, or are you a sort of fly by the seat of your pants kind of person? Like, do you? Because I've been on business trips with both kind of people, and I like to be comfortable. Like, I like to have some time, but like some other people, they're like, oh, we don't need to leave until an hour before our flight, and I would just in my head, I just freak out. I was just curious what kind of person you are.
I'm actually a bit of a hybrid.
Okay.
I have traits of both. So I drive people crazy with that I'm traveling because I have no idea what the flight time is or where I need to be until the
Okay.
absolute last minute. Like, don't act like I'm flying to Mexico next week and I had to remind myself, wait, what time? What did I book a morning flight, an afternoon flight? I should probably get a car service organized. Like, I don't think about those things until like the absolute last minute. I do like to give myself time at the airport, but not because I'm worried about whether or not I'm going to make it through the TSA line, which, by the way, was the longest I'd ever seen it when I flew to DC for Ledge Day in Charlotte. So that was very illuminating. So going to Mexico now next week, I have purposely made sure that I'm giving myself enough time, even though I have TSA. So yeah, I'm a little bit of both, but again, not because I think I'm going to be uncomfortable or miss something. I like going to the airport because I like the airport and I have my little routine at the Charlotte airport. I like to go to Jamba Juice. I like to go to the little sundry shop. I like to buy my trashy magazines. I like to buy my fruit snacks. I like to make sure I fill up on water. I like to people watch. I like to sit in the rocking chair. I like my routine.
Yeah.
It's part of the process.
Yeah, I do. I think I do a similar thing. Like, I make sure I have it's coffee and water before a flight, even though I will fall asleep the second I get in the airplane
This,
seat. Yeah.
me
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
I am known for this. I will fall asleep before the plane even takes off.
Yeah, traveled with my family, and we've flown to Ireland a lot together, and none of my sisters will sleep on a plane. But like, I'm out before we take off. I'm out,
Yeah,
and I'm waking up during the descent into Dublin Airport, and I think they're just super jealous. I think that's what
they are
yeah,
very jealous. People
yeah.
are very jealous of me. My whole family has always been jealous of my ability to sleep at any
Yeah.
moment, anywhere. It
Um,
is a very good thing that we have that. Is an excellent skill for being a road warrior.
yeah, I completely agree. And then there's a couple other things, and the other thing I think you mentioned it a couple times in the interview, but I think I know what the answer is. But what's most important to you outside of your work and your career?
I mean, I know this sounds cliche, but for this stage of my life, what's most important to me is my family
Yep.
and my kids and developing them as culturally curious people, and making sure that I give myself time to be with my kids and for them to see me personally as opposed to just always seeing me in work mode, which has been very difficult this year because I could be work Vanessa outside the house, but because of the pandemic, my kids saw way too much of work Vanessa this last year
Yep.
being in the house with me all the time. So what's really important to me is developing, obviously the relationship with my kids and my husband and being with my family and just being very intentional around making sure my kids are well-rounded and culturally curious and just having that. I got very involved in my kids school with their which I'm sure is going to come as no surprise that they have like an international festival. And so as soon as I found out about that when my son was in kindergarten when he first started, I immediately got involved and with the Spanish teacher, she put it together and I wanted to make sure different countries were represented. And I even got one of the cruise lines involved the first year.
Oh, nice.
So that I care about that. Like I care about just being involved in my kid's life. And of course, any working mom would give the same answer, but it's very important to me that my kids see the world through the lens of international and not just, Mooresville, North Carolina, which
And
is
my
a beautiful
last
place to live.
Yeah. My last question, again, I know this is a bit longer than usual, but I really enjoyed the conversation, but I did want to ask
Thank you.
this because I've heard this going back to the Ask the Ledge Day. Zane and the guests spoke about how, I mean, things, all these consumer headlines, it appears that things are moving in the right direction for travel. And I think they are moving in the right direction coming out of the pandemic, but there's still so much work to be done and so many things that could be improved. And I'm curious if you could change anything about the industry, about the travel trade, or about the industry in general, what would you change?
Oof.
I know it's a heavy question. I mean, it's something
That's
I've thought about. I
yeah.
mean, the commission payment structure for advisors, I think, is just needs to be changed. I mean, Zane
Mhm.
spoke about that. I think Matthew and Jennifer spoke about that too, and I think about
They
that all the
did.
time. But I'm curious if you have a take on that question.
I definitely think that it needs to evolve. I think that there's a lot of policies that exist within partners that are from the model of the brick and mortar model and from not the host model, and that needs to be changed. Like there's a lot of policies out there that are very untravel agent, they're not travel agent friendly at all, and they're again they served a purpose 20 years ago, but now this whole business of not paying commission to the advisor because they switched host agencies and it's outside of 30 days, like that's ridiculous. Like you need to pay, especially after the advisor just had to book and rebook and book and rebook, 3 or 4 different times. And because they decided to switch their affiliation because they were making a business decision for themselves in the long term, are you telling me they're not going to get paid their commission? Like literally, that's a thing right now.
Wow.
So I feel really agitated by that policy. So I think that needs to change. But I just think that that is a reflection of some antiquated policies that exist out there that need to be reimagined for the new model. We're for the host model and
Yep.
for today's travel advisor. So I think that that needs to change. I think the term, this has been a big one for me. What needs to change is the term distribution channel when
Okay.
it's used to travel advisor. I don't know why that term triggers me. Every time I hear a partner reference a travel advisor as a distribution channel, it just feels very transactional.
Yeah, it feels cold.
And right.
Yeah.
And the partner needs the advisor, and they're going to move forward. We're going to move forward together from this meaningfully and profitably if we treat it as a living, breathing relationship. It's a living, breathing entity. Like there's nuances to it that are not so formulaic. And so when you use terms like distribution channel, it just feels it doesn't feel like what it is. Does
So
that make
what?
sense?
Yeah, I mean, I always love the word partners. I think partners is a
Yeah,
great term. Yeah, I think
partners.
that's what advisors are to a lot of these suppliers too. They're partners. They're almost as they're as close to being a part of the company as they can get without actually being on
Mhm.
payroll.
Yeah,
Yep.
they're partners and it's a relationship. And just like any relationship, it's like even think about romantic relationships, you have to put time into it and you got to do things for your partner without expecting something in return sometimes. Think about the little gestures that you do in your own friendships and in your own romantic relationships, and then apply that to your professional relationships too. Like I tell our travel advisors all the time, like call a partner, send them an email to just say thank you or how are you? How
Yeah.
can I help you? You shouldn't just reach out because you need something or because you have to escalate something or something went sideways and now you need help. Like that's like the friend that only calls when they need something.
Yeah.
Nobody likes that friend.
Yeah. Exactly. Um.
So it's a relationship and it's not a transaction. Travel advisors are not, we've evolved from order takers anymore. We've evolved from that. We're not sitting in for the most part, a brick and mortar with brochures on a wall where somebody's going to walk in and take it off the rack and point to it and say, book me this trip. Like that's just not the way it's done anymore. And yet a lot of policies and a lot of training programs and just a lot of things generally are still structured around that model. So that needs to change.
So I'm gonna wrap up here just because we're running out of time, even though I'm sure there's a lot of other stuff we could speak about too. But I want to say thanks because I
Thank
really did
you.
enjoy this conversation. Like hearing about your past on the cruise ship and hearing about your leaps of faith was
Yeah,
illuminating.
leaps of
And
faith.
yeah, I mean, I hope I'm trying to do my best to take stuff from all these people. It seems like I'm stealing, but like it takes stuff from everyone. I'm
No, that's
yeah. So and I really appreciate you giving me your time today.
Oh, I really enjoyed this conversation too. And I often you need a moment to sort of, you've given me pause to really, think about my journey too. And I don't often do that. So I appreciate the opportunity to just have a little bit of self-reflection myself. And, talking to you about different stages of my career is also reminding me to just trust and to keep trusting and to keep taking leaps of faith, because you can often get bogged down right in the day to day and forget that. And definitely that I was in that mode a lot this year because we were in crisis management mode for most of the year. And so at some point you have to switch out of that mode and get back into a more forward moving mode. And it is a distinct shift. So this conversation has definitely reminded me to take more leaps of faith. And I love sharing my entry story into the cruise industry. I do. I like to say that I know the cruise industry from the inside out because I worked on board, and then I know it from this side. And I've seen it all with cruise ships. And I even I was in charge of like lifeboat number 10 for a while on one of the ships. And I was like a messenger on the bridge, during lifeboat drill. And so I've done so many different things in the cruise industry. And I really love the industry. I love the cruise industry. It really is my heart. There's a lot of soul to the industry. I feel very passionate about cruising, and I'm very honored to be able to share that with you. So thank you.
Well, again, thank you so much. It was great to see you in DC last month, and yeah, I'm sure I'll see you in person very soon too.
Very soon. Yes, there's lots of events are going to come up fast and furious for sure.
Yeah,
And yes, I look forward to another ASTA event. Hopefully, I'll see you in Chicago in August.
yeah. Chicago in August sounds great to me too. So
Yes,
yeah,
I agree.
have
Thank
a
you so much,
yeah, have a
Dan.
great day, Vanessa. I really appreciate your time.
All right, bye bye.